Welcome, my friends, to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson. And today is Friday, which means it's a philosophical day. Duncan, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Absolutely. Good to be here, man. How's everything?
Everything's good. It's my pleasure. Just excited to dive in and have these conversations that I look forward to so much each and every week.
Likewise.
So the topic on hand today, what are we talking about today, Duncan?
Right. So every once in a while, I see these arguments when it comes to poker. I mean, like I'm very interested in the game, and also I consume a lot of poker-related content. And people, every once in a while, they come up with this argument that, the concept of acting out in public, the idea that it's okay because poker is such an emotionally driven game and it's such an emotional roller coaster that it's okay for people to have outbursts. It's okay to get out of line. And actually, some would argue it's desirable. People want to see that. People want to see, poker players to, break stuff in real time and curse and do all those things. And I wanted to explore this a little bit.
Sure.
Because, I guess some questions that I had is that, in other aspects of life, like if, for example, if I have a bad day and I really want to vent out, let's say in the office, I mean, I don't work in the office, but let's say I'm in the office and I have colleagues, like, is it okay to start screaming and yelling? And like, that's what I wanted to explore a little bit. And,
Sure.
And I want to start with a specific question, you've seen outbursts, like we've all seen them, sometimes they're funny, sometimes not so much, but what is your emotional response, generally speaking?
Me personally?
You personally, when you see a poker outburst, and it depends, of course, on the situation, but tell us some of the top thoughts that go through your mind. What are you thinking when you see an outburst?
I almost never am affected emotionally when I see a poker outburst at this stage of my life. I think it's just somewhat expected, especially on TV and such. So like when somebody's smashing something or somebody's yelling, it's like, to me, I have zero reaction. I'm not like cringing away from it. I'm not like, ooh, that's awesome. It's almost like, it's par for the course.
Par for the course. Yes. And I guess I should have been more specific when I say emotional response. Is that, again, is it something you like it? Is it something you don't like it? Is it more like, oh, they're wasting my time again?
I don't know. I mean, I have mixed emotions, right? Like, I think that as it relates to like people talking about things, that those sort of polarized high emotion moments tend to get conversations going, tend to get people talking about poker a lot, whether it be people that are like, oh, that's great, or people that hate it. I think that in general, polarization creates eyeballs, and that sort of behavior is polarizing. I would say, I think that my take on the situation is that too much of the responsibility over time has been on the players to create these sort of like entertaining or polarizing situations while they're playing in a poker tournament. And I think that production behind the scenes could probably do a better job of crafting drama without the players themselves having to manufacture it. In some ways, or it's even false manufactured, and you can pretty much tell that somebody's just like doing a thing to get more airtime when that's not how they actually act on a regular basis.
Speaking of drama, do you think like somebody needs to act like a monkey to be interesting, or do you think like there's alternative ways that they can do that?
No, I think there's alternative ways. I mean, like there was it's funny. I'm going to cite a reality show that now I don't even know the name of it because it's been a few years. It was a racing show where it was on Netflix. It was a Netflix show, and basically it was a bunch of like racers from different disciplines who were running the specific course and getting timed, and they were trying to figure out like who the best racer was. And in the beginning, they did interviews with every single driver, and I was like, these interviews, just get to the action, But hearing the backstory and hearing where these people came from and what was riding on them being successful in this race, what was at risk, was compelling. It's ultimately what made the show watchable. Like that, and that drama wasn't created by somebody, you know, trying to just be antagonistic towards another racer. As a matter of fact, I don't think anybody was antagonistic towards anybody in the whole series. It was more so what they have to gain and what they have to lose by doing well. And in which case, there was this inherent drama of when dreams were unrealized or when dreams were realized. So, I mean, from that way, that's what I mean by, like, I think that production side can do a better job in poker of like telling the behind the scenes stories of like, what does laddering up, what does getting fourth place mean to this specific human being as it relates to their life as a human being. And I think that's compelling TV.
Absolutely.
You know, I think that it's more compelling than somebody saying they're going to burn the casino down. I think somebody saying they're going to burn the casino down is like, even when it was said, I thought that there was an overreaction by the poker community at large, because it's just an act, and everybody there was, you know, they were all pros and high level players, so nobody was really affected by the shenanigans of one specific player. So like that to me doesn't matter at all. The times where somebody's acting out that do affect me are when it's targeted to one specific player and the intent is just to make them feel like shit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you're actually making a very good point, because I want to go back to the thing that you just said, like, you know, the background matters. What's inside a person's mind, you know, like their backstory, their inner workings of their thought process, all of that stuff matters, and people care, and that's the difference between, for example, you talk about good TV, that can be the difference between a good movie and a bad movie sometimes. Sure. Right? If you have, like, people call that character development. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because as you were saying this, you're talking about these interviews, you reminded me that I had this thought recently. I had some time to actually catch up with some of the Marvel TV shows, and I was very surprised, because I really like the TV shows far more than I like some of the movies. We talk about, you know, Fat Thor sometimes here, and then, you know, talk about Marvel movies. We're both Marvel fans, and I was like, why is this so much better? And I think one theory could be that because the character development is much better. You get more time to go into, which is actually what these comic book writers have in mind. They just didn't create you know, a caricature of a character. They created a person, right? I mean, with issues and with pluses and minuses and advantages and disadvantages, and like a real backstory. And I think that is what draws into these stories, and why also books can be so interesting, because they have an opportunity to go through the story.
Marvel would not be anywhere near as interesting as it is if there was no character development, if the characters didn't have depth, if you didn't care about them, if they weren't flawed. You know, you don't need to really go very far to see the other side when it's just a character that doesn't have a lot of depth and the story is not very compelling and the villains don't have depth, and, you know, the villains don't have these areas of gray like the DC movies. In my opinion, I just don't like any of them. They just lack humanity in some way that just makes them not compelling to me. Whereas the Marvel TV shows that are produced, they're just much better as far as like characters and stories, which ultimately, like, that's the point, right? You can't just make up a superhero and all of a sudden it's the best one ever. They need a story. You need to know about them, their fears, their drives, their motivations, where they come from, where they're going, their failures, their triumphs, all of these things.
Absolutely. And you heard it here, folks. The Marvel better than DC, okay? So like the debate is closed.
The debate is over. It's open and shut. Yeah, when the entirety of your franchise rests on one character making a decision because his mom and his enemy's mom share the same name, I think that, yeah, that's that's a nail in the coffin for one of the franchises.
I will only use the exception of you know, all the Batman trilogy from Christopher Nolan. That would be the only exception, because I think that was very well made.
Incredible. but not really a part of the DC expanded cinematic universe.
Not the cinematic universe, exactly. It's like a reimagined story, like Joker, for example.
Yeah.
So why don't we take the like, here's a suggestion. Why don't we take the skin in the game approach and ask ourselves the question, instead of asking how would we respond when we see people having outbursts? Let me ask you this: how would you choose to behave in a public setting, and why? Like, you are in a highly televised show, how would you choose to behave, and what is the thought process behind it?
Not a thing that I've given a ton of thought into. Like, I think my typical MO is to be a fun loser. Because I think that people enjoy playing with somebody who's a fun loser. You know, we had a meetup game in Vegas in the past week or so, and me and John just determined that we were going to play terribly. And, you know, I ended up getting buried in this 1-2 game, and tried to be as fun of a loser as I possibly could, you know, give people some excitement as they're doubling up through me again and again. And I mean, that's typically how I want to present myself. If I did have an outburst or showed emotion, I think it would be just in the general sense of, you know, not directed at anyone, more so just directed at the moment, whatever that moment might be. I know for a fact that I would not celebrate. I actually think that what's interesting is the good celebrations are, to me, can be as obnoxious as the general outburst of negativity. Just whenever you win, somebody else loses. And I think it's just super disrespectful to just like make a hero call, be right, and just scream at the top of your lungs. You know, that to me is just like, man, it's kind of gross. Maybe even grosser than somebody yelling because they got a bad beat, in my opinion, because that's like being a bad winner. And maybe that's even worse to me than being a bad loser.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, that's, I think that was one of the questions of the past, you know, what is worse, to be a bad loser or a bad winner? Yeah. And I think it's kind of ugly. I would definitely agree with you. Do you think that any sort of outburst, especially like on live television, do you think is lazy in any shape or form? And to clarify, what do I mean by that? Sometimes it's easy to just be yourself, and something that I actually encourage everybody, including myself, of course, to be. I mean, you want to be yourself. You don't want to be somebody else. But at the same time, we have some ethical conducts, right? I mean, some rule of conducts when we're in public. Like, for instance, you know, we may resist the temptation to scream in somebody's face when, you know, they're not helping us, or, you know, at a clerk, you know, whatever it is. Like, let's say that we have a disagreement with them, or they're not helping us with our day, and most of us, you know, they will, you know, we will
refrain
That's the
from
word I was
yelling.
looking for.
Yeah.
Exactly. We will refrain from the outbursts, right? I mean, we will control ourselves. So that's the hard thing to do. The easy thing would be to just be ourselves, and then start, you know, calling that person names. So do you think there is something similar to poker, or because the emotions run much higher, and there is far more tension, is more understandable? And what are some of your thoughts?
Well, it's hard, right? Like because I think biologically we're all constructed differently. You know, I don't know if Phil Hellmuth is capable of controlling himself. Just like if he did work on himself every single day for the rest of his life, trying to tone down his poker brattishness, would he be able to contain himself? I don't know. It certainly appears as if the answer is no, but I don't know how much work he's done specifically in toning that aspect of his personality down.
Let me follow up on. Sorry, no, please.
Yeah, go ahead. I just think that it kind of depends on how a person is made, whether it's lazy or not lazy, I think.
And I would agree with that. Like, I mean, if there is a huge amount of depends in everything, right? And it depends on the person. But it's interesting that you brought up Phil Hellmuth, because I think there's something incredibly interesting, at least to me, the concept of calling yourself a poker brat. And I've always asked myself, is this, you know, an understanding of the situation, or is it a rationalization of an otherwise deplorable behavior? Like, I always ask that myself, like, is it okay for me to go in public, start, berating people? I'm going to say, you know what, guys, I'm a good guy, but that's Duncan, everybody. Duncan, everybody. Like, can I do that? Like, can I actually give myself a nickname? Or is it understandable because perhaps I am Duncan, everybody? So you know what? You have to live with it. So at what point?
I think that, so I think mostly, I don't know that he gave himself that nickname, although he does lean into it and embrace it. I think that because of the way that he's gone about things in his career, it appears as if there's incentive to be the poker brat, which makes it to where basically it creates a situation where he's not going to go out of his way to not be the poker brat, because then people just aren't going to talk about him as much as they currently do, which means that he's going to lose relevance as it relates to like sponsorships or promotions or whatever it is, right? Like the goal is to get eyeballs in that direction as frequently as possible, and it certainly appears as if that he gets more eyeballs than the super calm and nice people at the table that never have any outbursts but have more success on the felt than him.
No, that's a very good point. And to be fair, I think there's something to be said about it's different to say that you don't have outbursts versus saying that you're for a lack of a better word, you're a boring personality, if you will, right? So I can see a difference between the two. Like,
sure,
one can be. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's a definite difference in like never showing any emotion and being a robot, because that's just, I think that's bad too, as it relates to like the entertainment factor of poker.
Absolutely, and I have a specific example in mind. I mean, both poker related, but non-poker related. I mean, with poker is a little bit complicated because we try to analyze poker, so it's perhaps better to use examples from different areas so that we can see what's going on. And the example that I have in mind, which I think an incredibly interesting personality, would be a person like Sam Harris, right? I mean, Sam Harris is not a person that you will see outbursting in public, right? But I mean, you can certainly not call this person boring. Like, a lot of the things that he can say, incredibly interesting things, and many of them controversial to some. So it's the type of person that can keep you entertained without having to curse a single time, or without having to.
Yeah. I think there's different profiles that are different archetypes that work for entertainment. There's the Terminator, right? Like Phil Ivey. He doesn't have any emotional outbursts ever. I don't even know that I've heard him talk on a final table stream unless he's being interviewed in some capacity. It's just, but he just shows up and, he's like just greatness, poker greatness in the flesh. He's a Terminator, and people really enjoy watching that archetype go to work. I think Sam Harris, again, he's not super emotional, but he does ask difficult questions and has difficult conversations, and has access to humans that are at the top of their field that make for just very compelling viewpoints, perspectives, and opinions. So, I mean, Sam Harris, he's not ultra emotional. However, he's also compelling. And that is more related to, in my opinion, the topics that he's willing to really dive super deep into and talk about that most of humanity would probably be afraid of touching with a 10-foot pole.
Absolutely. And I think that can make things interesting. And I think that's what I would call the epitome of free speech, right? I mean, the fact that you don't need to be salty to the other person, right? I mean, you don't need to be an asshole to be interesting, right? I mean, you can actually poke into very interesting topics and be very, very interesting and be very non-boring, if you will.
Sure.
And you mentioned Phil Ivey, and why don't we try and dissect? What do you think that Phil Ivey specifically, what are some of the things that he does besides his game? I mean, because there's a lot of good players that make him so interesting at the poker table.
I don't know. I mean, to me, it's his game. It's the myth. It's everything. The legend that he had. In the same way that like Doyle's not the most entertaining poker player to watch on high stakes poker, but everybody watches because he's Doyle. He's legendary. I think it's just how that persona has been built up over time. Ivy was there during the Moneymaker run back in 2003. He like finished ninth, so he's been a part. Despite being only in his like mid 40s, he's been a part of the poker mythos for a long time. For close to 20 years, and he's never really gone away. He transferred his skills from live play to online and was exceptionally successful on full tilt playing online, which is not an easy transition to make. He's just been high level, extremely adept at any form of poker that he's taken on. And I think that's very compelling. I think that's when you build somebody up as the greatest of all time. I ran a tournament a few years ago called the #PokerGoat, and Phil Ivey won far and away. Nobody even came close to beating him in the votes as to who is a better player. And I think that if I were to run it again today, that would be the case. And if I ran it again in 5 years, that's probably going to be the case still.
I would agree with that. I would bet that would be the outcome. So to summarize, you think part of it is what these figures, Phil Ivey and Doyle Brunson in particular, represent. So
I think it's lucky. It's right place, right time.
Right place, the right time, but also the results, right? I mean, because
sure.
Again, both Phil Ivey and
those two exponentially they work together and they exponentially increase each other. Doyle, right place, right time. He was in Vegas playing, Texas Hold'em, wrote a book on Texas Hold'em that would one day explode. His name was in Rounders. In the same way that Phil Hellmuth his name was in Rounders, and Johnny Chan was in Rounders. And I think Johnny Chan, his name being in Rounders, actually built up kind of the myth of Johnny Chan probably a lot bigger than it deserved for a number of years in the poker community. But, it's just he won a key hand against Eric Seidel at the WSOP, won a world championship, and then won it again the next year. And then it was publicized and it was talked about in a movie, and now it is the thing of legend. And I mean, yeah, right place, right time.
And now we have to convince our students that no, there is no consistency in the main event. People don't expect the same people to win the tournament and all.
No, I mean,
no, just
right.
kidding.
But there was also not as many people in it back then as well. And I'm sure Johnny had an edge. Yeah, it's super, super fortunate, super lucky to go back to back. But at the end of the day, he played one hand well against Eric Seidel, who basically just value bet way too thinly and busted himself. And I mean, that's it. He played one hand very well. That was in a movie, and that just built his name up to something astronomical. Yeah,
absolutely. If I may add to that list a couple of things that I personally find interesting, I think specifically for Phil Ivey is the way he also handles himself at the poker table is very special. I mean, the famous, Ivy stare, for example, right? I think that's something that, we don't get to see that from, the poker professionals today. Like, I mean, it's something that is like, for example, like poker professionals tend to behave like similar to someone like, let's say, Patrick Antonius, where they sort of like feel like more cold.
Well, Patrick Antonius, so you mentioned something there that kind of I realize. Another part of Ivy is he's always taken on the best. He's never shied away from playing the best players on the planet in a public setting ever. Like, so he's always been in there battling. And I think that there's something about that is just innately compelling whenever you think there's a nosebleed game going on somewhere in the world at this moment, and chances are Phil Ivey's in it. I mean, that's something that is just innately compelling to me.
Absolutely. And again, that adds up to the incredible background, right? I mean, the incredible, like it builds on that myth, so it definitely makes it stronger.
Right, and some players will play in a high stakes game with 12 big blinds. And,
that's also true. I did want to add also one thing that because you mentioned Doyle Brunson, I think that something that has for him, other than his age, obviously. I mean, again, which his age is something that, to your point, adds to the myth, to the background, right? I mean, it's the fact alone that we see somebody who's like over 80 sitting at the poker table is just incredible all by itself. But there is something about Doyle Brunson, again, the way he handles himself, but also when he opens his mouth to tell a story, I think that everybody's listening, right? Because it's people want to hear the old timer talk about stuff, and he always has like an excellent timing. And it's not he's necessarily trying to do that to entertain. He's actually said that he doesn't consider himself an entertainer, but he has these stories, and I think these can.
I'm not an entertainer, but I'm going to regale you with stories for hours on end while you're just totally entertained, right? Like that's
exactly. Are you not entertained? Yeah, no, I mean it is really interesting, I think. And so I guess so to close this thread, it sounds as if we both come to the conclusion that there is other aspects that can make somebody interesting.
Sure, absolutely. You don't have to be an ass to be interesting. Like maybe there needs to be some kind of antagonist. I don't know. I don't really think that's true personally. I think the antagonist at a final table can just be life and life situations and past failures and that sort of thing. That it doesn't need to be like a villain who's involved here. I think it's probably unnecessary in our game. But I also think that the mistake that, in my opinion, has been made with poker and entertainment is that we've tried to highlight the game too long, and we've tried to highlight the sheer amount of money that somebody wins, and you just get used to that. We need to know the stories behind every player at the final table, where they come from, their past failures, what winning means to them, how this will be life changing, what they'll do, how it upgrades their life. How they can provide for their children if they don't, if they make like top 3 and then they bust in 6, right? Like you feel that pain when you understand these players more often. But instead, when a player busts 6, it's like, oh, you won $200,000. How's it going to change your life? And you're like, yeah, no. Now I'm out of makeup. Hooray!
Which it's actually that you bring this up, because I guess a follow-up question on that would be, do you think that in the absence of, let's say, villainy, we need to have something akin to rivalry? And if not, if a rivalry is not necessary, do you think we need to have some sort of friction of any kind, which is what you just mentioned?
Yeah,
sounds like.
I think rivalry is good. I think rivalry is probably always good in any endeavor. Friction, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm on the fence. I could go either way. Like, is it necessary? Probably not. In the same way that I don't think emotional outbursts are super necessary for poker. I think that friction is probably not necessary either.
Friction. Like, maybe friction is not a right word. Like, do you think that it feels like some sort of like a obstacle to overcome, if you will? Or what if we replace the word friction with the word obstacle? Like, do you think it's necessary for, like, the same way that when you're watching a movie or you're having a story, there's always a problem, like some sort of like a challenge to be overcome? Do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be good for compelling storytelling. And the obstacle could just be like a big stack, right? Or just like a really strong player that has tons of success battling at final tables, where, it's a David v. Goliath type situation.
As poker players, like, do you think, I guess twofold question. First of all, like, as public figures, do you think public figures have responsibility on the way they behave, which is something we've actually asked before?
Yeah.
And I guess the follow-up question on that, do you think that there is a specific measures that can be taken, or specific ways we can behave at the poker table to perhaps unmotivate or discourage specific, like, outbursty behavior and promote a more higher quality, promote
Sure.
a higher quality. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that to me has been, it's pretty obvious that like the punishments in poker are kind of strange. Like one orbit off, exceptionally subjective. I mean, basically just hard rules as to what kind of behavior is not tolerated. And then, a penalty could just be they take 5 big blinds from your stack. You lose chips for acting like an idiot. And if you have 7 big blinds, now you've got 2. Best of luck, right? Like I think just having direct incentive to not act in a particular way through losing of chips, that to me seems the best deterrent, right? It's like, oh God, I lose 10 big blinds if I yell at this person and I've got 8 big blinds. So you just bust yourself. Well, you're probably going to be able to summon the willpower to not act like a jackass.
Skin in the game, essentially, on top of
Yeah.
skin in the game, right? Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yes. And how about responsibility? And again, I mean, this is something that it's personal, but do you think that perhaps, again, I can address that question to you personally. Do you think you have responsibility as a public figure on the way you behave?
I think that you do, but it's, again, we're in this like subjective territory of like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. I think maybe the responsibility is just to be consistent with the perception of you, which would be great for Phil Hellmuth, right? I don't know. I mean, it depends, right? Like, so I guess it really hinges on who you're trying to serve. Are you serving yourself? Are you serving humanity, right? Are you trying to serve the people that you're influencing, that listen to you, right? And if you're trying to serve those people, then yeah, you have a responsibility to act in a way that you want to see other people act in a way that like makes things better, it improves things over time, not in a way that can be self-serving, that gets you a sponsorship deal or whatever through just being antagonistic towards people, and doesn't really serve humanity at all. Like nobody's like, we're not getting better by yelling at people and tearing people down and all of that sort of thing. So I guess like to me, it's a matter of like, are you focused on your audience, your people, or are you focused on yourself? And if you're focused on your audience and the people who look up to you, then yeah, you have a responsibility to act with maturity and have grace under pressure.
To dig a little bit more on that, do you think like they have also responsibility, or we actually, I should say, we have responsibility as human beings also, like to?
Sure.
Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I think that what's the point of life if not to progress humanity forwards? And our behavior and our actions in any kind of a setting, regardless of who you are or whether or not you have an audience, impacts humanity. If you're yelling at people in Starbucks because they added whipped cream to your coffee and you said no whipped cream,
or they forgot,
right? That's probably not doing a great service to your fellow man, right? It's making the workers feel terrible. It's making everybody around you feel uncomfortable. And it's also driving home a point that it's okay. There's social proof that what you're doing is acceptable. And I think that like avoiding that, putting that kind of social proof out there, we should be responsible for that. It is important.
I would agree with that. And if I were to add something to all of this, I call it the great paradox of life, right? The great paradox of life. I have 2 examples, but basically generalized to the following idea that on the one hand, we should be absolutely responsible, never call ourselves victims, no matter what, for every action we take, and take full responsibility on all of our actions, as I've mentioned multiple times. But at the same time, be completely ready that people are not going to do the same, right? That's what I call the paradox of life, right? We should be ready to realize that the world around us is not full of responsible people. We should be 100% responsible, but expect that others are not going to be, right? That's what I call the paradox of life, because that will protect us necessarily, self-protect us, not expect outer protection from outside. Yeah.
That's a long-term mistake, right? Is like trying to hold everybody to your
own
paradigm of life, whatever that is. I think that's just critical mistake. And again, if the goal is progress, that's not a way to create progress. Because then you're just trying to make people feel bad about their own perspective, which is not a way to influence another human to look at the world in the way that you do.
Absolutely. And I have an example which is considered a hot take and nobody likes, but I think
nice.
it summarizes that idea. And the idea is that I think of parenthood. I think that parents have absolute full responsibility to give everything to their kids. Meaning, if a kid wanted you to cut one of your arms, you should be doing it, because it's your responsibility that kid, and that's the part that, it's a little bit visceral, right? But the idea is, of course, that the kid didn't have the opportunity to ask whether it should be born or not, right? It was the parents' decision to bring the kid to life. So they have full responsibility. They should give their own lives. At the same time, the kid should be ready to be completely emancipated from their parents, because they should be, if they really, really hope their parent to actually give an arm and a half to them, they will never going to be able to be free. So it's this really weird paradox, which sort of like summarizes that idea that the parent should be ready to give everything and the kid should want nothing. So
sure, yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, some anecdotal things that I've observed as a parent too. I think that parents often they underestimate the responsibility that they're carrying as it relates to their children. We went to a place in Georgia, Stone Mountain, maybe a few years ago, which Stone Mountain, Georgia is in the news for lots of reasons, namely the Confederacy. And a lot of it's a polarized topic, to say the least. But we were walking in, they had a snow thing, and this dad was walking with two kids, and one of the boys hit the other boy. And the dad just spanked the boy, like just hit him and yelled at him and said, "Don't hit," And it just kind of struck me as like, just doesn't really see what he's doing, doesn't see the cycle, that isn't responsible for what's going on. And that's not something that's not a way to foster the kind of behaviors that you want in your kids by hitting them and then telling them not to hit people. Right. And so, yeah, I think that you have incredible responsibility as it relates to your children. And again, going back to influence and outbursts, just in the real world, like everybody is, every single listener is influential to someone in the world.
Absolutely.
Right. And so that means that we all have responsibility when it comes to acting the way that we would like other people to act.
Absolutely. So what, again, to your point, because every listener has responsibility, we also have responsibility. We're listeners of other content as well. So we're listeners as well. So what we as poker players, as listeners, as human beings, can we do at the poker table to promote behaviors that we think are beneficial?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer. Like there, it's, I don't think that as players, it's our job or really our responsibility to tackle such issues. I think it's more the facilitators, the producers, the people running the tournaments. I think that the best thing to do would be to create rules or have mechanisms in place that deal with such behavior.
I'm asking, sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
Oh, the reason why I'm asking is because I feel that, the rules is not necessarily something that we control.
We've had our rules topic, right? I think it's exceptionally difficult, right? Like, I mean, the short answer is just be cool, treat people the way that you would like to be treated. And if you're feeling hurt because of a run out or whatever, just, you can express it, right? If you got to say fuck, then just say fuck.
Right.
That sucked. But don't yell at the person across from you, right? Don't attack someone, because the reality is, we had a Wolves workshop with Adam Creek just a few days ago, a high performance workshop. And he said that, before he raced in the Olympics, a thing that they would say is thank you to their competitors. Thank you for being here. Because if you were not here, we wouldn't be able to compete. If you were not here, we wouldn't be able to feel the pride in winning a gold medal. It wouldn't mean as much as it does if the competitors weren't there. So if you're playing poker, be thankful to the competitors for showing up, for being there. If they didn't show up, you wouldn't have a game to play. You wouldn't have a way to make a living. You wouldn't have a way to, spend your weekends as a hobby and something that you have fun. So, I mean, being grateful and thankful for the competitors, I think that should be a motto for everybody that plays this game.
Absolutely. And gratitude in general is something that, again, I mean, we beat enormous odds just to be here today, right? I mean, just to have the opportunity, just being able to listen to that podcast. I mean, most people don't have that luxury, believe it or not. So absolutely, gratitude is a great thing. I do have one heuristic, because I've been thinking about it a lot. And you mentioned, if you want to say fuck, and just don't hurt anybody, don't assault anybody. And I think this is a very good heuristic. The idea of speak your mind. If you have something to say it. It's a free country, and it's important to express yourself. And here's the thing: we were talking last week about censorship, and we're talking about free speech, and talking about ideas like that. I think it's incredibly paramount to, if you have a bad idea, it's incredibly paramount to let that bad idea out, because then you're going to hear the other side. And if we are able to express ourselves, I think that's a very good thing. Like, you can express your bad ideas, your good ideas alike, and hopefully the good ideas are going to rise to the top. So one heuristic I can see at the poker table: if you see something that you don't like, speak up. Speak up. Don't be personal. Don't attack anybody, but speak up. Say the thing that, in my opinion, I don't think you should be rate dealers, for example. Or in my opinion, I don't think you should throw your chips like that. Or in my opinion,
well, what's interesting, so I agree that you should not berate dealers, right? But at the same time, they should also be held accountable and held to a high standard for doing their job, right?
In my opinion, dealers should be held accountable. Speak your mind. Like, that's
right, great. Right. So, and I mean, a lot of cases as it relates to dealers, like another situation that kind of popped up was maybe a few years ago, I played a PLO game, and the dealer that was put in the game, his hands were shaking. He didn't know how much the pot was. Right. When somebody says they raise pot, he had no idea what pot was. The player in the 9 seat was like grabbing chips and like cutting the pot up, like splitting it. And it was utter chaos. And I would say that, the dealer wasn't put in a position by the floor to succeed. And that responsibility, where you could say it's the dealer's fault. I think it's the floor's fault for putting them in that position when they know that they're not ready to deal this game, where people are sitting $10,000 deep, right? It's not like a trivial situation. People are playing for lots and lots of money. So this is a thing that needs to get right. But I mean, yeah, dealers should be held accountable for, their behavior, their action, their ability to do their job. But that isn't to say that you should berate them or yell at them. Just constructive criticism, or having a conversation with the floor about, like, what are you doing? Why did you do this? I think it is a reasonable tack to take, right? So it's not about never offending someone. I think that inherently people will get offended no matter what, right. But I think people need to be held to a reasonable standard of conduct. So yeah, like, I think dealers can certainly be wrong. They can act inappropriately. They can do their job poorly, right? And that doesn't mean you should yell at them or treat them like dirt. You're just like expressing your experience and expressing how you feel.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would add to that is that, I agree with accountability and the people who are responsible, but because we cannot control that, the only thing I would add is hold the only person you can accountable, yourself.
Sure, yourself, right?
Like as a heuristic, right? I mean,
ultimately, I left the game. I picked up my chips
There you
and I
go.
was like, can't
There
play
you
in this
go.
game because it's
There you
not,
go.
I'm not comfortable, and I just left, right?
That's right.
Which was the option that felt the best in the moment. But yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah, but that can be a helpful heuristic, because you can always ask yourself, you may be the last person to blame in a certain situation. Always ask yourself, what did I do wrong? Like,
Yep.
because that's the only thing you control, right? I mean,
Sure.
that's the heuristically, right? I mean, what could I have done better? What could I say in that situation? How can I act in that situation? How can I get out of here? And if there is something that you think, like, for example, what we're discussing right now, because again, a lot of the things that we're thinking about are about public policy. If you think that specific things are good ideas to improve the casino, the environment, speak up, talk to somebody who may have the power to do that, have a conversation. If you have an outlet like we do, say those things. Like, for example, what Brad is saying right now, I think is incredibly important. Like, that the dealers, perhaps certain dealers need better training, or leadership. We were talking about leadership last week, and Brad made a very important point that we have holes in our leadership. So perhaps people who are in leadership positions, they need a better training. They need to think about it more. But all of that really comes from our own responsibility. It is our own responsibility somehow to make these holes revealed, right? I mean, to either write a piece about it, talk to somebody about it. It is all comes down internally. Even other people's responsibility is our responsibility, is what I'm trying to say here, right? That's it. And I know this is not a very comfortable thing to say, but at the same time, from another perspective, is also very comfortable in some sense, because that's the only thing we control.
Right. And to clarify my point, by the way, I would say that those are the things that are in dealers' control to do better.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right? And so things that are not in dealers' control to do better is like what river card is going to come out, right? Because they have an automatic shuffler. I think the next time that you plan on berating a dealer, I think you should just yell at the automatic shuffler instead and call it a piece of shit, and tell it that its mom was terrible and its genes are awful and it's just the worst automatic shuffler in the world. And just see how that works out.
That's right. That, or Laplace's demon, because if Laplace was right about determinism, the universe has been determined already. So, it was always going to happen, and you just didn't know it yet.
Yeah. So direct all of your angst about bad river cards towards Laplace. Those sources, not the dealer.
Exactly. Any final thoughts of any kind? Something that we didn't cover? I'm making.
Not really. I think that we're all works in progress. We can all do better. We should take responsibility for our emotional outbursts, and yeah, that's really it. I at the conclusion of this, I don't really think it's ultra necessary when it's directed at another person.
Right.
But when it's not, I think it's totally reasonable. I mean, you have the people in poker lore that are the faces of sadness and agony, and that's an emotional outburst. Absolutely. But compelling at the same time, and I think that's probably good for poker.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's for the listener, if it sounds that a lot of our conversations come down to responsibility and accountability, that's probably not a coincidence, right? Because again,
probably not.
A lot of it is highly related. But to summarize a few of the key points that we discussed today, we were talking about outbursts. There is a huge range of reactions, but I think we both concluded that they're not necessary to make a public game interesting. There's other ways people can act. Sometimes they're lazy. Sometimes they just cannot be helped. Another thing that we talked about was the idea of responsibility, of course, that in the end of the day, it comes down to what we choose to do as people.
I mean, just the only thing that we could do collectively when dealing with such behavior, I think, is just change the channel if you don't like it.
That's right.
If you want it to change, if everybody changes the channel, if 5 players stand up and leave a game and the game breaks as soon as somebody starts berating another player, well, that's probably going to change things. People are going to realize like, oh, we don't get to play poker if we act this way. And, but easier said than done when your livelihood depends on you sitting at the table.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think that's a good way. That's a good way to stop it, right? In the end of the day, again, if we're talking about entertainment, for example,
we're voting.
Voting, exactly. That's right. You're voting. That's a vote behavior, right? I mean, just change the channel.
Yep.
Do something else if you can control, and
vote for something else.
Yep. Vote for something else, and perhaps you can do that with your own behavior. Call the floor or whatever power you have. Just use it.
Yeah, vote against yourself. Vote yourself off the island.
Vote yourself off the island. So where can people find if they don't live in an island and they don't live under the rock? Where can they find us?
All the places. YouTube.com/why Alex beats Bobby. Twitter, ask the math doctor, and at CBG Podcast, and chasingpokergreatness.com, Greatness Village. That's where we talk about all of these things. These are the typical places to find both me and Duncan. And if you have any questions, comments, follow-up thoughts on today's episode or any of the past episodes, greatnessvillage.com is the place to directly connect with me and Duncan.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for your thoughtful comments and suggestions and constructive criticisms. We always read everything. We appreciate it very, very much. And keep them coming.
Yep. And to 80% of the comments, I agree. Duncan's terrible.
I agree, too. I agree. That makes me very happy. It means I can improve. I love it. I'm terrible.
I'm just joking.
No, don't take it back now.
I got to take it back. All right. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.
See you next week.